The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Alliance buzzed with activity. Hundreds of alien species gathered for the most important diplomatic summit of the century. Towering insectoids clicked their mandibles while floating gas-based beings pulsed with colored lights. The massive crystal dome above showed the swirling colors of deep space, making the whole scene feel even more otherworldly. In the center of the chamber stood the empty podium reserved for Earth's representative. The Alliance had finally decided to invite the young spacefaring species to join their ranks, mostly to keep them under control. They expected Earth to send their highest leader, accompanied by an entire diplomatic corps. What they got instead was James Miller. Standing just under 6 feet tall, with brown hair and wearing a slightly wrinkled suit, James wasn't supposed to be here. He was a junior diplomat who had been sorting files in the UN basement when the transport beam accidentally picked him up instead of the president. Error. This cannot be correct, announced the tall, blue-skinned head speaker of the Alliance. Where is your delegation? Your security? Your advisors? James cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. Well, there seems to have been a mix-up with the transport coordinates, but since I'm here, I suppose I'll have to do. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs and translated exclamations. Some species used their tentacles to express confusion, while others changed colors rapidly to show their disapproval. You mean to tell us, rumbled a massive creature covered in metallic scales, that Earth sent a single low-ranking official to the most important diplomatic gathering in 500 cycles? James smiled politely. Actually, Earth didn't send me. Like I said, it was a mistake. But I do have full diplomatic training and authorization to represent Earth in official matters. He pulled out his UN identification card, which looked absurdly small in the Grand Chamber. The head speaker's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. This is unprecedented. The protocols clearly state. Protocols. James interrupted, surprising everyone with his boldness. I thought this was about building relationships and understanding each other. Do protocols matter more than actual dialogue? The chamber fell silent. No one had ever interrupted the head speaker before. A small green-skinned being floated forward. The human makes an interesting point. Perhaps we have become too focused on ceremony and forgotten the true purpose of these talks. James nodded gratefully at the green being. Looking around the chamber, he noticed how the larger species occupied the best positions, while smaller ones were pushed to the edges. It reminded him of high school cafeteria politics, just on a cosmic scale. Since we're all here, James said, pulling a candy bar from his pocket and unwrapping it casually, why don't we start by discussing what each species hopes to achieve from these talks? And maybe we can focus on how to help each other instead of just following old rules. The metallic-scaled creature slammed its appendage down. This is outrageous. You dare to suggest changing procedures that have existed for millennia. Well, James took a bite of his candy bar, making several aliens flinch at this display of eating in the sacred chamber. Sometimes fresh eyes see things differently. For example, I couldn't help but notice how some species here seem more equal than others. The smaller species at the edges of the chamber perked up. The larger ones shifted uncomfortably. The head speaker raised all 4 hands for silence. Perhaps we should hear what the human has to say. After all, any species that can send a single representative so calmly into a room full of unknown aliens might have something worth listening to. James smiled again, finishing his candy bar and carefully tucking the wrapper in his pocket. What the aliens didn't know was that his calm exterior masked a racing heart and sweaty palms. But humans had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to handle overwhelming situations was to act like you belonged there. The universe had no idea what it had just started by accidentally beaming up the wrong human. The second day of the galactic peace talks revealed more than just diplomatic tensions. James sat in his assigned hover chair, watching the proceedings with growing concern. The massive council chamber had transformed into what he could only describe as an interstellar schoolyard, complete with bullies and victims. The mining rights to the Centauri sector clearly belonged to the Stellar Dominion, boomed the metallic scaled representative, who James had learned was from a species called the Dominators. Our fleet already patrols those regions. James noticed how the smaller green beings from yesterday shrunk in their seats. Their star systems bordered the disputed territory, but they didn't dare speak up. Point of order. James raised his hand, drawing all eyes in the chamber. Have we considered asking the species who actually live in those systems what they want? The chamber erupted in confused chatter. The head speaker's blue skin rippled with uncertainty. That is not how these matters are decided. Really? James stood up, straightening his now very wrinkled suit. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like might makes right. And we humans have some experience with how well that works out. The Dominator representative's scales rattled threateningly. You dare question our authority? No, James replied calmly, pulling out another candy bar. I'm questioning your logic. You see, on Earth, we learned something interesting about bullies. He unwrapped the chocolate, several aliens still flinching at this bizarre ritual. They only have power if everyone else lets them have it. The smaller species began whispering among themselves. The green beings from yesterday floated a little higher in their seats. Let me tell you a story about Earth, James continued, pacing the floor. There was a time when bigger nations thought they could push around smaller ones. They had bigger armies, more weapons, more everything. Want to know what happened? The chamber waited in tense silence. The small nations formed alliances. They worked together. And suddenly, the bullies weren't so big anymore. James turned to face the Dominators directly. Humans learned that true strength isn't about who has the biggest guns or the most territory. It's about who has the most friends. A tiny species, barely visible to the naked eye, suddenly projected their voice through their translation device. We have suffered similar encroachment in our sector. As have we, called out another species. The chamber filled with voices, centuries of grievances pouring out. The larger species shifted uncomfortably as more and more of the smaller ones found their courage. The head speaker frantically tried to restore order, but James spoke over the chaos. See what happens when you actually listen to everyone. Amazing things can happen when you treat others with respect instead of fear. The Dominator representative rose to its full height, towering over James. You threaten the natural order of things, human. Perhaps Earth is not ready for galactic society. James laughed, genuinely amused. Natural order. Let me tell you about natural order. On Earth, we have tiny organisms that can take down creatures thousands of times their size. We have small nations that have resisted empires. Size doesn't determine success. Adaptation, cooperation, and determination do. The green beings suddenly moved their hover platforms to float beside James. We support the human's position. The time for blind submission is over. One by one, other species began moving their platforms, forming a united group behind James. The larger species found themselves suddenly outnumbered. The head speaker's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. This is unprecedented. Never in the history of these talks has there been such democracy, James suggested, finishing his candy bar. Yeah, we humans are big fans of that. Maybe it's time the galaxy gave it a try. Looking around the chamber, James saw hope in the eyes, or equivalent sensory organs, of the smaller species. He also saw fear in the larger ones, not of physical threat, but of losing control. They were just beginning to realize that this accidental human diplomat wasn't just changing the talks. He was changing the entire balance of power in the galaxy. And it was only day 2. On the 3rd day of the galactic peace talks, the atmosphere in the council chamber had shifted dramatically. The smaller species now sat proudly at the front, while the formerly dominant species huddled together, whispering among themselves. James stood at the central podium, ready to address the gathered representatives about Earth's history. Behind him, a holographic display showed images of his home planet. You want to know why humans aren't afraid of your threats? James asked, looking directly at the Dominators. Let me show you something. The hologram shifted to show various scenes from Earth's past. This is humanity at its worst and its best. Images of wars, natural disasters, and catastrophes flashed by. Every time we faced extinction, we survived. Every time someone said we couldn't do something, we did it anyway. The head speaker leaned forward. But surely your species must have had peaceful periods of development. James laughed. Peace? Oh, we had peace. But even in peace, humans never stop preparing for the worst. We're interesting that way. We hope for the best, but plan for everything else. The hologram showed scenes of human achievements: the first flight, landing on the moon, curing diseases, rebuilding cities after disasters. See, what makes humans different isn't our technology or our strength. James continued, pulling out his daily candy bar. It's our mindset. We look at impossible situations and say, challenge accepted. A crystalline being chimed in, its voice like tinkling bells. But how do you maintain unity with such chaotic thinking? Unity? James grinned. We don't. Humans argue about everything. We debate, we disagree, we fight. But here's the interesting part. Threaten all of us, and suddenly we're best friends. The hologram showed scenes of international cooperation during global crisis. The aliens watched in fascination as former enemies worked together against common threats. Humans have a saying, James said, unwrapping his chocolate. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. We're really good at making friends when we need to. The Dominator representative's scales rattled again. Are you suggesting that your species would unite against us? I'm not suggesting anything, James replied calmly. I'm just sharing our history. Did you know humans invented something called spite? It's when we do things just to prove someone wrong, even if it hurts us too. The chamber fell silent as this concept sank in. The idea of a species willing to harm itself just to prove a point was terrifying to the logical alien minds. But that's not the best part, James continued. The best part is what happens after we win. You see those smaller species you've been pushing around. On Earth, we have a habit of helping the underdogs. Makes us feel good. The green beings bobbed in agreement. The human speaks truth. Already they have shown more concern for our welfare than the Dominion has in centuries. James nodded. Because we've been there. Earth's history is full of smaller nations standing up to bigger ones. Sometimes they even win. And when they don't, well, that's when things get really interesting. The hologram showed scenes of resistance movements, underground networks, and peaceful protests. Humans never really accept defeat. We might lose a battle, but we keep fighting. And we get creative about it. The head speaker's blue skin had turned pale. You mean your species continues fighting even after official surrender? Oh yes, James said, finishing his candy bar. We're very bad at giving up. Some might say stubborn. Others might say determined. But here's the important part. We don't just fight for ourselves. He gestured to the smaller species gathered around him. We fight for what's right. And right now, looking around this chamber, I see a lot of things that aren't right. The larger species shifted uncomfortably as James's words sank in. They were beginning to understand that humans weren't just another species to be dominated or controlled. They were something entirely new. A species that thrived on challenge, united in crisis, and fought for others as fiercely as for themselves. The galaxy was starting to realize that perhaps they should have done more research before inviting Earth to the talks. And James was just getting started. Day 4 of the galactic peace talks began with a threat. The Dominators had finally had enough of the shifting power dynamics and decided to make their move. We have positioned our fleet near Earth's solar system, the Dominator representative announced, its metallic scales gleaming menacingly. Submit to our authority, or we will destroy your homeworld. The chamber fell silent, all eyes turning to James. They expected fear, panic, or at least concern. Instead, they got something entirely unexpected. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh, or a mocking one. It was genuine amusement, The kind of laugh someone gives when they've heard a really good joke. James actually had to wipe tears from his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, still chuckling. "But do you have any idea how many times humans have faced extinction? We wake up every morning knowing a random asteroid could wipe us out. We built our entire civilization on a planet that regularly tries to kill us with earthquakes, volcanoes, and storms." The Dominator's scales rattled in confusion. "You do not fear the death of your species." "Oh, we fear it," James replied, reaching for his candy bar. "We just got really good at living with that fear. In fact, we turned it into a superpower." He unwrapped the chocolate with deliberate slowness. "Want to know what happens when you back humans into a corner?" The holographic display activated, showing Earth's military history. "See, humans have this interesting quality. The more you threaten us, the more dangerous we become. We call it rising to the occasion." Images flashed of various human innovations born from crisis situations. Every time someone tried to conquer us, we got better at fighting back. Every time nature tried to kill us, we got better at surviving. Do you know what humans did when we realized space could kill us? The head speaker's 4 eyes blinked. "What did you do?" "We decided to go there anyway." James took a bite of his chocolate. "Built rockets out of repurposed weapons, turned our deadliest technologies into tools for exploration. Because that's what humans do. We take our biggest challenges and turn them into opportunities." The Dominator representative slammed its appendage down. "You speak boldly for a species that hasn't even mastered faster than light travel." "Yet," James corrected, "we haven't mastered it yet. But thanks for the motivation. Nothing gets human scientists moving like someone saying we can't do something." He turned to address the entire chamber. "You think threatening Earth will make us submit. Let me tell you what it will actually do. Right now, every human scientist, engineer, and strategist is probably looking at your ships and thinking, how can we beat that? It's not even about winning anymore. It's about proving we can." The smaller species watched in fascination as James continued. "And here's the really fun part. Humans get creative when we're threatened. We don't just think outside the box. We forget the box exists. You might have better technology, but we have something better." "And what is that?" the head speaker asked. "Impossible determination." James finished his candy bar. "Plus, we've been preparing for alien invasions for centuries. You wouldn't believe the plans we have sitting around, just in case. Some of them are pretty wild, but that's humans for you. We plan for everything, even the ridiculous stuff." The Dominator's threat display started to falter. They were beginning to realize that threatening Earth might have been a serious tactical error. "So," James said, smiling pleasantly, "you can keep your fleet where it is. In fact, I encourage it. Give our scientists something to study. Just remember, every second you spend threatening us is another second we spend figuring out how to make sure it never happens again." The chamber erupted in murmurs as the Dominators withdrew their fleet without another word. They had just learned something crucial about humanity. Threats don't work on a species that turns fear into motivation. And James knew that the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. After all, what's scarier than a species that laughs in the face of extinction? The answer was becoming clear. A species that sees it as a challenge to overcome. Day 5 of the galactic peace talks brought a different kind of tension. James stood before the council, preparing to present something that would change their understanding of humanity forever. "You've all been curious about Earth's military history," James began, activating the holographic display. "Today, I'm going to show you why threatening us is a bad idea. Not because of our weapons, but because of how we think." The display showed ancient battlefields. See, humans started with sticks and stones. But here's the interesting part. We never stopped improving. Every defeat taught us something new. Every victory showed us what else we could do better. The head speaker leaned forward. "But surely your primitive beginnings led to this," James interrupted, showing modern military technology. "But that's not the impressive part. The impressive part is how we got there. Humans have this weird habit of turning everything into an advantage. Images flashed of various military innovations. Too small to fight the big guy. We invented guerrilla warfare. Enemy has better weapons. We figured out how to use the environment against them. Someone builds an unsinkable ship. We find a way to sink it. The dominators shifted uncomfortably as James continued. But here's the really interesting thing about humans. We're not just good at fighting. We're good at thinking about fighting. Planning for it. Preparing for things that haven't even happened yet. The hologram showed various military planning rooms and strategy sessions. Every human military has a department dedicated to planning for impossible scenarios. Alien invasions. Got plans for that. Giant monsters. Got plans for that too. Zombie apocalypse. You better believe we've got plans for that. A crystalline being chimed in. You plan for imaginary threats. We plan for everything, James replied, unwrapping his daily candy bar. Because humans learned something important. It's better to have a plan you never use than to need a plan you never made. The display shifted to show Earth's defensive capabilities. See these. They're not just weapons. They're messages. Each one says, we might be smaller, we might be newer to space, but we're not helpless. The chamber watched as James detailed Earth's defensive strategies. Not the weapons themselves, but the thinking behind them. How humans had taken every potential weakness and turned it into a strength. You know what's really fascinating about human military history? James took a bite of chocolate. It's not the wars we won. It's the lessons we learned from the ones we lost. Every defeat made us stronger. Every setback made us more determined. The head speaker's skin rippled. You speak as if defeat is valuable. It is to humans. James nodded. Because we don't just learn from victory. We learn from everything. That's what makes us dangerous. Not our weapons, not our technology, but our ability to adapt. The hologram showed Earth's rapid technological advancement. 200 years ago, we were using steam engines. Now we're in space. Want to guess what we'll be doing 200 years from now? The smaller species watched in awe as James continued. But here's the most important part of our military history. We learned that the best battles are the ones you don't have to fight. That's why I'm showing you all this. Not as a threat, but as a reminder. The display showed scenes of international cooperation, joint military exercises, and peaceful resolutions to conflicts. Humans can fight. We're really good at it, but we're even better at making allies. James finished his candy bar and looked around the chamber. So yes, we keep records of every battle, every war, every conflict. Not because we're proud of them, but because each one taught us something. And the biggest lesson: peace through strength works, but peace through understanding works better. The galaxy was beginning to understand something crucial about humanity. They weren't just a species that could fight. They were a species that had mastered the art of learning from conflict. And as the council chamber fell silent, they realized that perhaps the most dangerous thing about humans wasn't their ability to wage war, but their ability to turn every experience, good or bad, into an advantage. The records had spoken, and the galaxy would never underestimate Earth again. By the 6th day of the galactic peace talks, something unprecedented had occurred. The alien species, driven by curiosity and concern, had begun their own research into Earth's history. What they discovered left them deeply unsettled. We have reviewed your planet's entertainment media, the head speaker announced, his blue skin pulsing with anxiety. Your species creates simulations of its own destruction, for pleasure. James smiled, settling into his chair. Ah, you found our disaster movies. Yeah, we call that entertainment. Nothing like watching New York get destroyed on a Friday night. The chamber erupted in confused chatter. The dominators, in particular, seemed disturbed. You derive enjoyment from imagining your own extinction. Not just extinction, James replied, unwrapping his daily chocolate. We imagine all sorts of scenarios. Alien invasions, nuclear war, climate disasters, zombie outbreaks. Then we figure out how to survive them. It's kind of a hobby. The holographic display showed clips from various human movies and games. The aliens watched in horrified fascination as humans faced apocalypse after apocalypse, always finding ways to survive. But that's not what really scares you, is it? James asked, noting their reactions. You're more worried about what you found in our history books. The crystalline being chimed nervously. We discovered the concept of spite. Your species will harm itself just to harm an enemy. This defies all logical behavior patterns. Logical? James laughed. Oh, humans aren't very logical. We're emotional, unpredictable, and sometimes downright irrational. But that's what makes us dangerous. You can't predict what we'll do because sometimes even we don't know. The head speaker's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. We found records of human soldiers jumping on explosive devices to save others, of individuals facing certain death to protect their principles. This is disturbing. We call that heroism, James said softly. Humans will die for ideas, for freedom, for each other. But here's what really scares you. We'll also live for those things, and living is often harder than dying. The chamber fell silent as James continued. You found our capacity for violence troubling. Look closer. Look at our capacity for forgiveness, for rebuilding, for moving forward. That's what makes us truly dangerous. We don't just survive, we learn. We grow. We get better. A smaller species floated forward. We studied your concept of revolution, how smaller forces defeat larger ones through sheer determination. It is fascinating. And terrifying, James added, finishing his chocolate. Because it means you can never be sure of victory against humans. We might be down, but we're never out. We might be beaten, but we're never defeated. Not really. The Dominator's scales rattled in agitation. Your species speaks of peace while maintaining this capacity for violence. Of course we do, James replied. Peace is precious because we know the cost of war. We value life because we understand death. Every human carries both creation and destruction within them. We just choose which one to use. The holographic display showed scenes of human resilience, cities rebuilt after disasters, enemies becoming allies, humanity pushing forward against impossible odds. But you know what should really scare you? James stood, addressing the entire chamber. It's not our weapons, our determination, or even our spite. It's our hope. The aliens watched, transfixed, as he continued. Humans hope even when it's hopeless. We dream even when we're desperate. We create even when everything's being destroyed. That's what makes us dangerous. We never stop believing things can be better. The chamber remained silent, processing this revelation. They had looked into humanity's history expecting to find weaknesses. Instead, they found something far more terrifying. A species that turned weaknesses into strengths, that learned from its mistakes, that faced its fears by imagining them in detail. And most terrifying of all, they found a species that did all this not out of malice or hunger for power, but out of an unshakable belief in a better tomorrow. The galaxy had wanted to understand humanity. Now they did. And they were afraid. On the 7th and final day of the galactic peace talks, the council chamber felt different. Gone was the ancient hierarchy that had ruled for millennia. In its place stood something new, something uniquely human in its design. Today we establish new guidelines for galactic cooperation, the head speaker announced, their blue skin glowing with acceptance rather than authority. And we thank our unexpected human friend for showing us a better way. James stood at the podium one last time, his wrinkled suit now practically a symbol of Earth's unconventional diplomacy. I just did what any human would do, pointed out what wasn't working, and suggested we fix it. The chamber, now arranged in a circle rather than its former hierarchical layout, hummed with agreement. The Dominators, their metallic scales now dulled with humility, spoke up. We have learned that strength through fear is no strength at all. Their representative admitted, "The human way of building allies rather than servants. It is more sustainable." James pulled out his last candy bar. He'd been saving this one. "You know what's funny? I wasn't supposed to be here. Someone made a mistake with the transport beam." But humans are good at making the best of mistakes. The smaller species, now sitting proudly alongside their larger counterparts, bobbed in agreement. The mistake that saved the galaxy. The green being observed. Very human indeed. "But let's be clear about something," James said, unwrapping his chocolate. "Earth isn't joining the galactic community because we have to. We're joining because we want to. There's a big difference." The head speaker nodded, all four eyes in understanding. "And that is why the new charter specifically prohibits coercion or threats. We have seen how counterproductive that can be with humans. Plus," James added with a smile, "it's just not nice. And humans can be very nice when we're treated with respect." The holographic display showed the new galactic charter, written with input from all species, regardless of size or power. It emphasized cooperation, mutual defense, and cultural exchange. "Earth brings something unique to this alliance," the crystalline being chimed. "You bring unpredictability." James laughed. "We prefer to call it creativity, or innovation, or sometimes just plain stubbornness. But yes, humans tend to think outside the box, usually because we forget the box exists." The chamber shared what passed for laughter among their various species. The tension of the past week had transformed into something like camaraderie. "So here's what Earth offers," James said, taking his final bite of chocolate. "We'll share our creativity, our determination, and our unique way of looking at problems. We'll stand with the smaller species against bullies. We'll help build a galaxy where strength comes from cooperation, not domination." The head speaker's skin rippled with curiosity. "And what does Earth want in return?" "Just one thing," James replied. "Remember this week. Remember what happened when you tried to threaten Earth. Remember that humans are better as friends than enemies. Remember that we're crazy enough to laugh in the face of extinction, but wise enough to prefer peace." The new charter was signed not with grand ceremony, but with simple determination. Each species, large and small, added their mark as equals. "Oh, and one more thing," James added as the signing concluded. "Earth is sending our actual diplomatic team next week. They're probably going to be a bit more professional than me." The chamber erupted in what might have been panic until they saw James grinning. The galaxy had learned to fear Earth's potential for destruction, but they had also learned to love their potential for positive change. As James prepared to return home, the head speaker approached him. "You have changed everything, human. The galaxy will never be the same." "Good," James replied, straightening his tie one last time. "Change is what humans do best. Just wait until you see what we do next." The universe had learned an important lesson. Earth wasn't to be feared because of its weapons or technology. Earth was to be respected because its people could turn any situation, even an accidental diplomatic mission, into an opportunity for revolution. And somewhere in the UN basement, a transport beam operator was about to get a very unexpected promotion.